Welcome to this episode of Chop the Rock. I am Diana Long with the Little Rock River Market, and our guest chef today is Mary Beth Sanders, who is with the Pulaski County Co-op Extension Service. She does family and consumer science as an extension agent.
Yes.
And today we are going to learn some very basic canning skills. So thank you so much for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it. This is going to be so much fun.
I think so too. I think it's interesting that people, like we were talking before we started here today, that we both grew up in families that grew their own food and did canning, and it's very obvious that that's becoming a more and more popular thing for people to do. But one of the things that we were noting was back in the day when our grandparents were canning, it was really a money saver. That's just
For
how they
economic
did.
reasons.
Right.
Yeah.
But these days, people are doing it because their concern is not about the money savings, because it is kind of expensive to get started and get all the equipment that you need to start canning. But people are so interested in exactly what goes into their food that it's making a really big comeback. Let's get started.
Okay. First is you want to sterilize all of your equipment. What I'm doing is I picked up my jar, and I'll try to do this under here so that you can see, and it's just around the bottom lip of this jar, and what I'm going to do is rest it in the water real easy, put it in sideways so the water goes in real soft, and then set it in the bottom of that water bath canner for about 10 minutes so that it can get sterilized and it's perfectly clean so that we're ready to can with it.
Okay, so you're going to set this very softly, and inside this canner, this is a really big pot. And there is a special rack that fits over so that you can lay the jars in there. You don't really want the jars to rest on the bottom of the pan because the boiling, simmering action of the water will kind of knock the cans around, knock the jars around a little bit, and you don't want a glass jar to break because then you've got to scrap this and start all over. You cannot have glass floating around in there.
Absolutely. So a lot of what we're talking about today has to do with safety.
So these are going to sit for 10 minutes to make sure they're fully sterilized.
Yes.
And then you'll pull that out and kind of let them dry.
Yes,
That's
ma'am.
right. Okay. So while we're going through that, let's get started on our strawberries.
Okay.
These are frozen strawberries because at the time of filming, strawberries were not freshly available. But during the early spring, obviously, I'm going to recommend that you go to the Little Rock Farmers Market and pick up the strawberries. You got to get there early because they go fast. And then you can freeze those yourself if you're not quite ready to start canning yet, or you can start with fresh. So today it was just easier. We also wanted to point out for those people who do not have quick and easy access to get to some fresh strawberries, the frozen ones are always an option for you.
Absolutely. So with these strawberries, they're frozen and they're thawed out so that they're soft enough, because what we're going to do next is take this bowl of strawberries and mash them up just using a regular masher that most people have in their kitchen. And I'll go ahead and start doing that now. And this is really great if you can do it with adults, of course, but kids love to get involved with this step. Kids are so eager to learn.
They are.
And they want to be involved in the kitchen, but a lot of times as adults, all we're thinking is, the mess. But when it comes to something like this, just make sure, if you have a kid, have something underneath the bowl because it could get a little messy. But for the most part, they're here to mash stuff up. And they love doing that. So I'm just going to keep mashing this. And if we want, we can go ahead and measure the sugar out in this bowl.
So this takes 7 cups of sugar.
The thing with canning is you have to have an agent that helps eliminate the amount of bacteria that can grow in whatever you're canning. And so usually that's either sugar or some sort of an acid like vinegar. So
that's why you pickle things.
Yes, so that you can keep that bacteria at bay. And I have had people ask me if, going through this mashing process, and they're like, oh, what would be so much easier is if we just used a blender. And I'm like, that's a good idea, or a food processor. What we're making is strawberry jam. So you want to see small pieces of fruit, not large pieces, but really small pieces. So that's why we kind of stick to the mashing process so that it's not completely pureed. So you still have those little chunks in it. So on the recipe, it says that we mash up all these strawberries and then measure out 4.5 cups. We don't want to measure beforehand because then it won't be exactly the right amount that we're going to need in comparison with the sugar. So we went ahead, and these are pretty well mashed up. I think I've got all the big strawberries mashed into little tiny pieces. So let's get our pot that we're going to cook these in. And
so again, when these strawberries are frozen, they are flash frozen fresh. And so these are raw strawberries. So it is important to note that you do still have a cooking process here before
Absolutely.
you get ready, which is why you can take plain strawberries that are fresh from a field, wash them really well, take the caps off, and mash them just like we're mashing these thawed out frozen strawberries, because you're going to have to cook it all just the same anyway.
Absolutely. So, and this helps during the cooking process. We can measure 4.5 cups. And during the cooking process, you can see this is kind of thick right now. Like we said, like a thick smoothie or kind of like mashed potatoes.
See, and it's going to go over.
Yeah, no problem. And so whenever we cook, it helps take some of that water out and it gets a little bit more liquidy, and that's a lot easier to work with when it comes to putting this in our jars before we water bath.
These are easier to kind of, there's 2,
3.
3.
You want me to get that half cup?
Ooh, that'd be great. Then we don't have to guess. We could use the clear one, but the way you have to kind of shake this down.
That looks great.
There's our 4. It does feel very much like a smoothie.
Yeah,
it does. A really thick smoothie.
A really thick smoothie.
And then we have our half cup here.
And don't be scared by the thickness that it is right now, because it will. It'll cook down and it'll become a liquid.
Yeah. Look, see, just know that you're going to make a mess.
You're going to make a mess, and it's fine. Okay, so we've got our 4.5 cups of mashed strawberries. And the next thing we're going to do is add our 7 cups of sugar. So I'll go ahead and dump this in and kind of give it a little mix. If you want to go ahead and mix that.
Sure.
And our next step is we're going to kind of get this a little pre-mixed, and now we're going to put it on the stove to cook it down. We want to bring it to a rolling boil.
Okay, I think we're all mixed up.
Okay.
I don't see any pockets of the granulated sugar, and I'm just going to leave this spatula here, and we can use that to scrape off the bottom.
And so we're going to move this over to the stove, bring it to a boil for 1 solid minute, and then we're going to skim off some foam. If you have leftover strawberries like that are already mashed up, you can actually go ahead and cook them with sugar. You want to do it separate from this pot because this is measured out according to the recipe, but you can make strawberry syrup to use with pancakes. You can just even keep the strawberries in there and put it on top of ice cream, use it as a dessert.
Great.
So yeah,
you don't
ever
shortcake.
Yes, you don't ever want to waste something like that has so many different opportunities.
Even a smoothie.
Yeah, you could turn it into a smoothie. You just put some berries, some bananas, some ice, and you've got a great smoothie on your hands.
There you go.
So,
there you go.
not
waste not on that.
Yes. I'm going to start, and it's already getting very liquidy.
It is. It is getting very liquidy around the edges of the pan. And so Mary Beth is just doing a soft, continual stir just to make sure that this doesn't stick. So let's do this. Why don't I finish this stirring for you?
Sure.
And you can tell us a little bit more while this is cooking about some of the programs that y'all offer.
Sure.
Because you can teach these canning classes and people call in for advice. So let's tell everybody about that as a resource.
Okay, so I do. I actually teach canning as a class. For participants, it can be youth or adults. Most of the programs that we offer through the Extension Service are free of charge, but this one we have to have a little additional charge with just to cover the food that's bought, the jars, things like that, and it's usually around $10 or $15. I don't take more than maybe 5 or 10 participants per class because, as you can imagine, the kitchen would get too crowded could get a little unsafe. But if you would like to start one of those classes, if you would like to get in on one that I already have scheduled, just call our extension office and we can get you hooked up with all of that. Now, canning is not all that I do. I also teach programs related to food safety, as a class called Serve Safe, and it's a food safety training for anyone that works with food in a restaurant, in a cafeteria, as a manager, and it is a national certification training, so that once you go through the training, you pass the test, you can be certified for up to 5 years in food safety anywhere in the United States. So you can travel, that certificate will travel with you. I also teach family life programs. Our family life programs range from parenting classes to sort of self-help classes that address maybe some past traumatic issues that we've been through. I have a stress management course that's wonderful. It's not going to solve all your problems, but it gives you a good place to start. I also teach classes on financial management, and I've talked about this with Diana.
Yeah.
I love talking about personal finance with people, which might sound a little funny, but if you don't know how to start off on the right foot, it can really get you in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, it's hard to dig out of that hole once you get into it.
Absolutely. So I teach youth in Pulaski County at schools, or if it's a homeschool group, I can teach them too, especially with the program that I really enjoy called Get Real, Here's the Deal. It's a real life simulation, like a game, but I teach the students how to use a checkbook, and they get an example family, they get an example salary, and then they have to go through these 12 different stations where each station relates to a real life expense, and budget their money according to what their family and their salary looks like. I also teach adults on how to manage their finances. We talk about credit and safety. We talk about fraud and protecting yourself against stuff like that. So I'm a jack of all trades, if you will. If you call our office, you can get someone to help you with whatever you need.
Which I think is just an interesting thing, because you don't expect the Division of Agriculture to have all of those additional programs. But it is a great resource for our community. I think a lot of people are taking advantage of it, but there's room for so many more people to participate as well.
Absolutely. So what our office is still known for is our agriculture. We help farmers and local people that garden in their homes. We help them identify if they're having a problem with their yard or their crops or their flowers, and that is what we've been known for. And we take soil samples at our office, and it's free of charge to the community, so we can help you diagnose what might be going wrong with your grass in your yard, or anything else related to that matter if you have a crop. But the other side of Extension is we do all these family and consumer science programs. And we also partner with, we have SNAP. We teach SNAP programs, and as well as FNEP programs. And like I said, most of these programs, we will come to you or your group, your organization, to teach, and almost all of them are free of charge. So we want to be utilized in the community. We appreciate whenever we get calls and asking people to come and they want us to come and speak. So maybe call a month or two in advance of whenever your event is going to be, and we'll do our best to be there.
And we are starting to get the pink foam on the top. We've not had quite a rolling kind of big boil yet, but I think we're getting really close. You can tell that everything is melted. You can see that the strawberries have just a little bit of chunkiness in them, which is perfect for a jam. Perfect. So what's our next step here?
So our next step, and I want to make sure I'm doing this in the correct order, we measured our crushed strawberries and our sugar into a saucepan, and we stirred. We have it on heat, and we're going to bring it to a rolling boil for 1 minute, stirring and avoiding boiling over. So we definitely don't want that to happen.
It wasn't quite boiling, so I've just turned the heat up, and I'm just paying very close attention to it and keeping it moving around so we don't stick.
So right now, all we have in this pot is our sugar and our strawberries. So what we need to put in is an agent to help it gel, that gel form that we're used to seeing with jam and jelly. So we're using some liquid pectin. So after it's been boiling for a solid minute, we're going to put this packet in there, and then after it's kind of distributed evenly, we're going to start skimming off that pink foam.
So we'll bring this back over.
Perfect.
That way you guys can see the foam that we're talking about, the consistency. Let's use this real quick just to show what kind of, if you can capture that to see just how much chunkiness is still left in there.
Yes.
So do we continue to stir while we add this?
Yes, so I've opened our gel and I'm gonna add that in.
So this stuff used to come in a powder, and then you would have to mix it to make the gel.
Now
so
it still comes in both.
It
So
does.
That's a really important thing to note. And I get calls like this quite often at the office, and someone will say, well, I have powdered pectin, but I don't have gel pectin, and my recipe says I need gel. Is there a way that I can, you know, substitute one or the other? And honestly, we don't recommend it. We recommend that you use whatever your recipe suggests, because now it's made specifically for a recipe like this.
Gotcha.
So if your recipe calls for liquid, go to the store and get some liquid.
And I had no issue finding the liquid pectin. It was just right there, and it was next to 2 different styles of the powdered pectin.
Yes.
One was specifically for use in things like jelly because it worked well with sugar, and then there was another that you could use that was made specifically for low sugar content items.
Yes.
And so that's a really good option if you're watching your sugar, you've got someone who's diabetic, who wants to have some canned stuff. There are definitely some options out there for you.
Absolutely.
So I think that we're all mixed up here. So
Looks
now
great.
we are going to spoon off some of this foam.
Yes. Now this is a process that is tedious, and I'll actually use that spatula. That'll
This
be
one?
perfect. And maybe just this
Okay.
cup for us to put the foam into. But it's very liquidy. So what I'm doing is I'm barely touching the top of this,
Dragging it across.
bringing up the foam, and just kind of dumping that off into a cup. Now again, this is not being done for safety reasons. This is perfect. You know, if you canned it and put this in your jars, it would be perfectly safe to eat. But this is so that we have a very consistent and even texture in our jars. Now when I'm picking up, I'm starting to get more of the clear gel, and I want to leave that because that's the good stuff that we want to keep. So you can see there's still little pieces of foam. And if you are a perfectionist, you can take all the time you want to go through and get all this foam out, but a little bit is not going to affect us very much.
Gotcha. Okay.
Now with this too, what we're going to start to do is fill our jars with this mixture. So we're going to bring over some jars.
And we'll start with these others here that have already been sterilized for this project.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that you mentioned that, because if you remember, on our back burner, we have a stock pot that has our lids for canning in it. And our lids have been in this pot and they've been boiling. Now they've cooled down well enough, but we do this beforehand as a sterilizing process to make sure that these are completely free of germs and bacteria, so that whenever we put them on our jars, we can be rest assured that everything is clean and it's been done safe.
Gotcha. So we have all our jars here, minus the one that's cooling off, and we'll get that one in a second.
So you fill up your ladle, kind of let it drip for a minute, and then pour it really easy into your funnel. And something very important in this process is that we're looking for, and let me make sure that I read it correctly, it's a 1/4 inch headspace.
Is that, okay, so let's clarify that. Is that this area, or is that under this area?
That is from the top of your jar down.
To the lip. So that is, so if you fill this up to the bottom of the lip, you're gonna be okay, but don't fill it further than that.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And so we actually have, and we'll do this here in a second, but this nifty little tool you can get at the store, and you see how it's kind of stair-stepped?
Right.
And it has measurements, and it tells you this is a 1/4 of an inch, this is a 1/2 inch, this is 3/4, so that you can set it on the edge of your jar.
Oh, wow, okay.
And you know if you've made that. So I'll go ahead and fill mine up, and we will do that process. How we measure the headspace is I showed you this little handy dandy tool. So I'm going to set, because I want a 1/4 of an inch, so I'm going to set this part on the edge of the lid, and it's going to go down. And
that's perfect.
It sits right on top. And this
So I can add some to my 2 jars here.
Absolutely,
Okay.
absolutely. So again, with the fair, if you're entering your items in the fair, this is something that judges look for. Did you have the correct headspace for whatever it was that you're canning? Now, it's important to note that it's different for different, oh, here's this if you want to use that. It's different for different recipes, for meats, for vegetables, for jams and jellies, for salsas, tomato juice. Everything has a slightly different headspace. So with most jams and jellies, it's 1/4 of an inch, but just make sure that you're reading your recipe and doing it as what it calls for.
And is that because this is going to expand a little bit as
Just
it
a little
gels? So that gives it room
Yes.
to do its thing.
And
And
it's-
is it, as far, let's say we're not entering a fair contest with our jelly here today, because we're just going to eat this. This is not going into a competition.
Absolutely. We still want the headspace to be accurate for
Okay.
safety reasons, because if we leave too much air in the jar, now the process of water bathing is supposed to help eliminate this, but we don't want to leave too much air in the top of the jar because that can react with bacteria and cause it to grow.
Okay, that was my thing, is because mine is not, so this one right here is just below, so it really does need to touch the top of that.
It does, and
Okay.
you look like you're just on the verge.
I am.
So just
And so
a little more.
one of the things that with this canning funnel, and it sticks down in there a little bit, so it raises up the level of the jelly. So it looks
Right.
like there's more in here than there really is. And so when I pull this thing out,
It gives you a little more space.
it gives you a little bit more space. And so I almost would say the way this seems to be working out is if I fill this jar to what looks like the complete top with this in here, and I take it out,
It's just about
that's
1/4 of an
the,
inch.
that's the right amount.
And I'm
It's a-
telling you, if your grandmother or your mom or even yourself has canned before, you start to find a rhythm and you see it and you know, yep, that's exactly where it needs to be. But this measuring tool is a great thing to have just to reassure yourself, and especially if you're canning and you're teaching someone else, you know, they're not able to eyeball it themselves for the first
See, and
time.
I got too much in this one. I can tell that just by looking at it. So I'm going to grab a spoon.
That's exactly what we do. Nothing
and we
fancy
will
about
just
it.
dip it out.
Yep, you just get a little spoon,
Okay.
take a little bit out. And again, what this mixture is really hot, the strawberry and sugar. So we, you know, of course, want to be extra careful.
Be careful. Okay, now that's perfect. So this is very scientific, you know, which is interesting because a lot of cooking in like a basic recipe for cooking, you can kind of be a little bit flexible if you like less salt, if you like more salt, if
Right.
you want to, you know, substitute a red pepper for a green pepper, or, you know, those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But when you're baking and when you're canning, it is essential to follow the directions just as perfectly as you possibly can.
Yes, it's a science, especially because with anything that we can and we're preserving, it's meant to be able to sit on a shelf over time.
So I am just wiping around the entire lip and then the top of the lip.
Yes.
These are the ones that we've done. If you want to, have you already wiped those there?
Oh no, I have not wiped these jars over here yet.
Okay.
So okay, so y'all are thinking, how in the world is she doing that? This is just a little magnetic tool that really helps, and we're putting these on a clean, dry cloth after they've been boiled. And what you can do is just take your finger, because the top part, this silver part, is not ever going to touch the food. And so you just take your finger and kind of set it on the cloth. You want to do it with the silver side up so that you're prepared and you're ready to start canning. Now I have two that are stuck together. There we go. Get those separated.
Get these.
And this is the part, I'm telling you, whenever I'm doing these classes with kids, they can't wait to use this magnetic little tool to pick up their lid and put
That's
on
right.
their jar.
I bet. And I saw one of these tools picking up the product that we needed to do this show. I can't remember how we did this without these things.
Yeah. Well, this is just another step, and you know, you might have some people that say, I've never, you know, used one of those before in my life. I've always picked up my lids, and this is what we suggest, because as Extension, we present to the community research-based information. So what we're going to do is use that same magnetic tool and pick up a lid. And we're just going to put it on top of this jar, and you can use your finger, just hold it right there. So it is on the jar. Now this is an important step, is whenever we're putting on our ring, you want to twist it on, but you don't want to just crank it tight. You want to do what we call fingertip tight. So just turn it and turn it. You feel it getting tight, and kind of give it a nice gentle little closure.
Gotcha.
But you're not going to just crank it as tight as you can.
Okay.
So we do fingertip tight, and then we just go through the rest of our jars. What we're doing is, through this process, just to reiterate, we boiled these lids, we boiled these jars. We're not touching the under part because this is what could potentially touch our jam and jelly. So we're just setting it down, only touching the top of the lid to release it from the magnetic wand, as we call it, and then putting on our ring.
So you're going to sterilize the jars for about 10 minutes. You're going to boil these lids for about the same amount of time, and then they can just sit in that water until you're ready to use them.
Yes. And on the packet of these lids, and if you buy them in a whole pack, it will have instructions for exactly how to go through that process. And these recipes that we have from Extension, they go through every single step. There's such great recipes for people that want to just get started with canning. And it's, I've never done this before. It makes me kind of nervous because of all the food safety issues. This will take you step by step by step through how to sterilize everything and do it in the best way possible. So with these jars, before we put them in the water bath canner, this is what we're looking to hear.
Can you hear that?
It's a little ting, a little ping that's going on.
Closer to our mic.
Is that better? Okay, so you can hear, and it's soft.
It is.
But as someone that's canned before, and many of you out there, I'm sure that have, you know how reassuring that little ting, that little pop can be, because that means I did it. It's sealed.
Right.
It's completely sealed. When they click, that means they've snapped down.
Which has made that airtight seal, so that's the sound of this lid kind of suctioning to what it's sealing
Absolutely.
off. Gotcha. So we have one more lid we need to put on.
One more lid. Put that on fingertip tight. And now these jars are ready to go into our water bath canner. So we're going to use these nice tongs because that water is boiling. But before we do that, let me pull out this tray so that they can see it.
Oh, great. We can stock the tray up here.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Well,
so
you can just...
Yeah, this is a little tray that you can see these grooves on the side. It's meant to sit on the edge of your pot so that you can do this process. But this tray keeps the jars from sitting right on the bottom of the canner, which is right on the heat, and that might make it a little uneven. So this helps keep the whole jar as a whole to can evenly.
Right. It's essentially hanging there in the water so that it's got the entire thing is surrounded equally.
Right.
But it also keeps the boiling from knocking them around and kind of...
That's true.
So when you set these in here like this, is it this way? Or,
yes.
Okay.
You put them right side up. We never want to turn our jars upside down because then what we've put on the inside, our strawberry mixture, has now touched the lid, and we've taken every precaution to make sure that that's clean, but we don't want to even risk it further. So it sounds very tedious and time consuming. It is, but it's all for the purpose of making sure that we're doing it safely.
Well, and if I can't eat a jar of jelly a month, so let's say you ate one jar of jelly a month. That's 8 months worth of jelly right here. And so, I mean, that's going to last you. So it's worth that investment of time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so since we've started, it maybe has been an hour.
Maybe.
And we're going to put this in the water bath canner behind us, and we're going to wait until we can bring it to a rolling boil. And then in your recipe, it says bring water to a rolling boil, and once it has been reached, boil for 5 minutes. So this process really isn't even very long, but it's to ensure that we have a good seal and that these jars are going to be safe to eat. What we're looking for is whenever she's putting them in the water bath canner, we want to make sure that they're completely submerged. There you go. And set
it all the way down?
Set it all the way down.
So if you set this all the way down, then they are completely covered, and you are going to need to use something to get the pan back out because it's going to be really hot. But even as I just dunked them under, and I hope that you could hear that a little bit because I was so close to it, a few of them started to go ding, ding, and do their little thing.
So it's almost boiling. We've got a few air bubbles coming out of our jars. Don't worry about that. That's completely fine.
Great. So our boil is going to get started, and these need to boil for 5 minutes.
Just 5 minutes.
So we'll take a break, and we'll be back in 5 minutes when our water bath is complete. We'll be right back.
Named one of 5 secret foodie cities by Forbes Travel Guide, Little Rock has a thriving artisanal food scene, great restaurants, and a growing number of craft breweries. Request a vacation planning kit at littlerock.com and see why we say dining is better with a Southern accent.
Okay, so our 5 minutes is up, and that means that our jars of strawberry jam are ready to come out with our water bath.
We're ready. We're finally ready. So what we're going to do is very carefully, we're going to take off, or actually, if we want to turn off the heat so that boil kind of, goes away into a very small simmer, we can go ahead and take off the lid.
And you want to, I would say, open that lid away from your face.
That is a great point, yes.
So that you don't get a face full of very hot steam. And I'd let this drip its little droplets over the pot before you set it aside.
That's perfect. And not just with canning, but anything you're cooking, you always want to open the lid away from you so you don't get a face full of steam.
Yeah, there is nothing more. And so we're going to be really careful here. These handles, right?
Yes.
Have been down in this water, so
they're extremely hot.
And so we're just gonna.
This is heavy because it has all of our jars in it. So you want to be really careful, but it sits perfectly on top. Now, can we hear the pings? We'll try to be quiet if we can hear any as we take them out. Okay. And here's one of our jars. And it actually has not dented yet, so it might pop here in a minute. As they cool, they tend to pop. And that's actually, I'm glad that that one hasn't yet, because that reminds me of something. There's one.
I heard one.
And whenever I tip them over, I'm just getting the water off the top of the jar. Okay, and I'll actually let you get the rest of those out.
Because typically, I mean, our bar area that we work with for the filming of the show is a pretty good 4 feet from our from our stovetop. But for those of you at home, especially if you've never used one of these and this is your first time, you really want to make sure that you are setting, you have an area as close to your stove and your hot water as you can, because these jars are delicate, they're hot. You may not be, I heard it. You may not be an expert at this tool yet, and this is just a safety thing for you.
Absolutely. So that's what we talked. So she's going to put the rest of the jars right next to her, because they're very hot. They're very fragile. You don't want to shake them. So that's why we usually put them on the countertop that's closest to the stove. So, oh, there went another one. So we want to make sure that we're listening for those. Now these jars, we heard them, pop and ting, and that's great, but we still don't want to move them around too much or kind of fuss with them. We want to let them sit overnight to make sure that they're completely cooled to room temperature. They've had time to take their time and just calm down and cool down, so that we're not we don't ever want to turn them upside down, because then our fruit's going to touch the lid. There went another one. I heard it.
This one's about to pop too.
Good. Is that if they don't pop right away, you never want to rush them by putting them under a fan, because some people have, and you want to be careful in your kitchen.
That'll cool the glass off too fast and it'll burst, right?
It will.
Yeah.
And especially you want to be aware of drafts in your kitchen, like where your vents might be coming from.
Or if you're doing this in the winter and the cold air is coming in.
Absolutely, because we might not think of that stuff normally. Oh, we have a floor fan, but you don't want any air directly hitting these cans to make them pop on purpose. You want them to do it on their own.
On their own. So maybe best case scenario is if you've got some countertop area next to your stove, where your cabinets are a little bit above, and kind of push them to the back.
Right,
They're out of the way, they're undisturbed, you're not going to have that airflow. Another one popped. It's so much fun when they pop.
It is, because it's like you got an A+. It's like, good job, you're done.
Right.
That's all you needed to do.
Oh, there it goes.
I hope y'all can hear this, because that's the ting that you're looking for.
Also, just a side note, as we were cleaning up, this pan here that we're using is a non-stick pan, and it happens to be coated with this non-stick on both the inside and the outside of the pan. And so I would highly recommend that somebody uses a non-stick for this kind, or most other things that they're going to cook, because just a little hot water, letting that fill up, just took care of, and an easy wipe down just got rid of all of that super sticky, sugary, boiled over jam.
I was surprised. I thought it was going to be more difficult to clean up, but it went really quick.
It was a very quick process. So make sure that you are using the right equipment for how you're going to be working with this.
Now these jars, like we said, you want to let them sit overnight so they can cool down on their own. So now we're ready
We're going to do grape jelly
for
next.
grape jelly.